Welcome to Unit 1, Chapter 1, Lesson 1. Since this is your first flipped classroom video, we're going to take a little bit longer to go through everything, so that way you guys can get used to how this works and kind of what's expected for you to do while you're at home watching these videos. So the first thing we'll always go through is what the objectives are for this lesson. So your objectives for this lesson are to be able to write whole numbers, compare whole numbers, find the value of a number, and find the place value of a number. These objectives are what we went over before you left class today. Okay, so this is in the front of your workbook. Remember, we filled out our pre-rating at the beginning of class. What you'll do after this lesson is you will fill out your post-rating. Now, you can choose to do this after watching the video, or you can choose to do this at the end of the class period after we do some of our station work at school. This last rating doesn't get done, though, until right before the test. Right, so back to the lesson. First thing I want to talk about with you is the importance of having a highlighter when you're working on word problems. And the reason being is we like to just read through word problems and not actually look for what the question's asking you and what the important parts of a word problem are. All right, so we're going to get a highlighter. And first we're just going to read the problem, and then after we're going to look for those important parts. So Mary and Sean went for a bike ride. Mary traveled to Asheville, which is 8 miles east, and Sean traveled to Milton, which is 12 miles west. How far apart were Mary and Sean at the end of the bike rides? Right, so first things first, is it important that Mary and Sean went for a bike ride? No, that's just setting up the problem. Is it important that Mary traveled to Asheville? In this case, not necessarily, because we're not working in social studies or geography and talking about where she was going. We're more concerned about how far she went and the direction she went. So it is important to note that Mary went 8 miles east. And the reason east is important in this case is because she went east and Sean actually went 12 miles west. Okay, another piece of the puzzle there that's important. And the question asks, how far apart were Mary and Sean at the end of the rides? So because they went different directions, that's why their direction is important. Because if they went the same direction, they'd be less miles apart than when they went in opposite directions. Right? And you always want to make sure to highlight the question. That's the most important part of the word problem. You need to know what you're looking for. So let's say that both Mary and Sean started here. Right? So Mary traveled 8 miles east. Okay, so she went this way. And we can write 8 miles. Right? And then Sean went 12 miles west. So Sean went in the opposite direction. And he went 12 miles. Notice I'm drawing a picture. This helps me visualize what's going on here and why, when we look at this, why we're going to actually add these two together. Okay, we're going to add Mary's distance of the 8 miles east, and we're going to add Sean's distance of the 12 miles west, because now Sean is here and Mary is here. So we want to know, how far apart are they? Well, if it's 12 miles from Sean to where they started and another 8 miles to get from where they started to get to Mary, we have to add those two things together. 12 plus 8, that gives us 20. So the answer to the question is 20 miles. Okay, it's very important to label our answers. If you don't label, you do lose points. Right? We have to know what you're talking about. Are you talking about miles? Are we talking about kilometers? Are we talking about monkeys, bananas? We have to know what it is. Right? So our answer is they were 20 miles apart. Right, place value. You'll notice that in your workbooks, you have this where it's underneath the understanding whole numbers. Okay, and where you see blank spots here, you will be filling those in as I have them filled in here. So when we talk about place value, this is where we start to kind of lose a couple people, because we like to think of place value and value as being the same thing. Place value is actually very different from value. Place value is the spot where a number is. Right? Plain and simple, it's where you find the number. So if you want to put, it's the where of the number. Value, however, is how much the number is worth. So that's the how much. Right, you'll notice I gave you a spot to actually write that down so you can go back and reference it later on. When I put those things down, it's because I know that they're important and they're things that other students have struggled with in the past. So we're putting them on there to hopefully help you as much as we can now. So when we talk about place value helps us find the value. But the first thing we need to know is place value and how it works. You'll notice that there's always a comma, so we start counting from the right side and go to the left. And there's always a comma every 3 numbers. So it's 1, 2, 3, comma, 1, 2, 3, comma. Okay, this separates it into different chunks. So this chunk right here, okay, starts our units, and it's just our ones chunk. Over here is our thousands. So everything in here is going to be ones, thousands, 10 thousands. Okay, so now when we get into the millions chunk, we get 1 millions, 10 millions. So the first things first, you'll notice it always goes ones, tens, hundreds, and then it starts over again in the next chunk. I think it would be helpful for you though, instead of just writing ones in this chunk right here, I think it would be helpful to remind yourself that this is the 1,000s. Right, so here you should have that this is the ones, this is the tens, and this is the hundreds. And if you need to, I'm going to go back to my page and I want you to finish filling in all of these missing boxes. If you need to, go ahead and pause and take a moment to complete that. Now that you've completed that, we're going to talk about how we read this number. Place value is important in reading the numbers, and it's important because when we read the number, we're telling everybody how much this number is worth. Like what is it? If we're talking about money, how much money is this? But now we do start reading the number from the left. So when I read this, because this is only ones, this is only 7 billion. And I do have to put the billion on there because I'm in the billions chunk. Okay, so it's 7 billion, 202 million. Now we don't go 200 million, 0, 10 millions, 2 millions. No, we just say the 7 billion, 202. So read the number inside the chunk, then put the biggest place value on there that you have. All right, so in this case, we only had 7 billion. 202 million. The reason we say 200 is because the 100 millions place is the biggest one that we have in that millions chunk. So 7 billion, 202 million, 516,136. I gave you a spot below to actually write down the numbers, so I'm going to help you write that out. And when we write our numbers, we write them using words. We don't use numbers. Okay, so we have 7 billion, 202 million, 516,000, 136. Notice there are no ands in there. We always have this notion that we have to put and in there, 136. No, and tells us that there's a decimal inside this number. We're not working with decimals right now because whole numbers do not have decimals. Whole numbers are nice round numbers that we work with. So in this case, we don't use and anywhere, not where you see a comma, not between the word 100 and the next number. It's only used when there is a decimal. So it's 7,202,516,136. So now when we're looking at the difference between value and place value, if I were to ask you what is the place value of the 5, okay, that means I want to know where is the 5. So I would find the 5, and I see that it is in the hundreds spot, but in the thousands chunk. So the place value of the 5 is in the 100 thousands. Okay, so place value is the where. Where is it? It's in the 100 thousands place. If I asked you what is the value of the 5, okay, that's where you would tell me how much that is worth. The place value is helpful here, okay, because it kind of helps you realize how much it's worth. So since it is in the 100 thousands place, it is worth 500,000. Okay, so this is telling me where to find it. This is telling me how much it's worth. It's not just worth 5. Okay, it's not in the ones place in the ones chunk. It is in the hundreds place in the thousands chunk. So it is worth 500,000. And this is a big deal because if I were to say, okay, well, if you tell me the answer, whatever the answer is how much money I'll give you. If you tell me that this is worth 5, I'll give you $5. If you were to tell me it was worth 500,000, then I'd be giving you $500,000. You have to know your place value and what the value of that number would be. All right, so we're going to go to the next problem, and it is a word problem, so we're going to get out our highlighters. First, we're going to read the problem. Belize's 2000 population was 249,183 people. Iceland's 2000 population was 276,365 people. Which country had more people? Okay, so now what we're doing is we're taking place value and we're going to use it to compare numbers. So the important part here is that Belize's population is 249,183 people. And if you want to, you can even change up the colors if it's different information. So I'll use green for Iceland's population. That was 276,365 people. And then the most important part, which country had more people? So they are asking you here to find which number is larger. But if you were to say, well, 276,365 is bigger, you wouldn't be answering the question because they ask which country had more people. So in the end, our question should be answered by either the country Belize or Iceland. So what we do to compare these numbers, I actually like to write the numbers and line up the place values. So I'm going to put Belize on top, and that is 249,183 people. And then Iceland is 276,365 5 people. We always start from the left and work our way to the right. So we start at the left and we see that both of these have 2's. So this isn't going to help us. This column is not going to help us. So then we go to the next column and we see that it's a 4 and a 7. Because the 7 is bigger than the 4, that tells us that this number has to be bigger. Even though the number in the 100,000s place is the same, because the number in the 10,000s place is larger in this case, in Iceland's population, that tells us that 276,365 in fact is the larger number. So that tells us that Iceland does have a larger population. So the answer to this question would be Iceland. Moving right along into math symbols. One of the things that I will really be focusing on with you is making sure that you know how to use your math vocabulary terms and how to make sure you're identifying the right parts and pieces to an expression, an equation, and all those things that we're going to talk about this year. So right here we have the less than symbol. How do I know this is the less than symbol? It has its own name. We can't just say, oh, it's this or that. It is the less than symbol. The reason I know this is because it looks like a tipped L. So it has to be the less than symbol. If you actually take your left hand and make an L and then tip it, so make that L with your pointer finger and your thumb, you'll notice it looks like a less than sign. That will help you realize that this is the less than symbol. In the other case, if it doesn't look like a tipped L because it's backwards, then it has to be the greater than sign. So if it has a tipped L shape to it, it's less than. If it's the opposite of a tipped L shape, it has to be greater than. And we all know this last one down at the bottom. This is the equal sign. I mean equal to. So whatever I put this in between means that whatever's on the left and whatever is on the right have to be equal. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at these numbers and we're going to order them from least to greatest. Again, we have to know least means smallest and greatest means biggest. So I'm actually going to line these numbers up again. Okay, and I know some of us are looking at it saying, I know how to do this, this is really easy, but we're going to make sure that we practice because we're going to be using stuff like this a lot. All right, so I look at the first column and 1078 is actually the only number that has a number in the thousand spot. This tells me that this number has to be the biggest. Okay, so then now I can just look at these two and I can look at the hundreds column. Because the 4 is smaller than the 6, I know this one has to be the smallest. Okay, it doesn't have a number in the thousands place, so it automatically is smaller than this number. And because it has less in the hundreds place than this number, then we know that it has to be the smallest. So we're going least to greatest, so I take the 489 and I write that one down first. And now I have to use the correct symbol. I know that a lot of us have used the mouth opens up and eats the larger number. So if I were to use this symbol, would this be correct? If you said no, you are correct. Okay, this says, because this is the greater than symbol, this says 489 is greater than 654. That's incorrect. I need to use the less than symbol. So this tells me that 489 is less than 654, which is also less than 1078. We take a look and check, and our answer is correct. So what I would like you to do next is you have this in your notes as well. And I would like you to actually try this one on your own, and when you come back, we'll go over the answer. All right, now that you're back, we switched it on you. We went from greatest to least. In this case, we were looking for the biggest number, so to go first. So we write down the three numbers, line up the place values. Oops, I forgot to write down the 732 and 502. All right, so we look in the first column. The biggest number that we see is this 9. So because 9 is bigger than 7 and 5, we know that 923 has to be our biggest number. Okay. So now we're going to just take a look at these last two, and we can stay in the same column because they still are different numbers. Since 7 is bigger than 5, we know that the 732 has to be larger than the 502. Now for our sentence to make sense, because this is a sentence but written in numbers and mathematical symbols. So I'm trying to say that 923 is greater than, so I need to use the greater than symbol. So 923 is greater than 732, which is greater than 502. If you didn't get this correct, go ahead and erase and fix it, and make sure to do some more practicing and check with me and ask any questions if you have them tomorrow in class. Okay, but now this is where Edmodo comes in. So you have 4 questions here. They are not listed in your workbook. I want you to post your answers to this on Edmodo, and when you post your answers on Edmodo, you do need to number them. You don't have to write out the question, but you do need to write the numbers. So on Edmodo, you would write 1 and then what your answer is. So if the answer was apples, you would just write apples, and then you could write 2. And if your answer is 18, you just type in 18. Right, so there's not a lot of stuff that you need to write. In this case, I want you to write the number that you see there in words. I want you to tell me what the difference between place value and value is. Okay, you can use your notes for this, but I want you to try and tell me the answer to this in your own words. I want to know what the place value of the 0 in this number is. Okay, so these 3 and 4 are referring to this number in number 1. And I also want to know what the value of the 5 is in this number as well. If you have any questions, you can post them onto Edmodo, or you can hold on to them until class tomorrow. Remember, if you post them on Edmodo, it's a little bit easier for us to get started in class. And if you have any questions about the flipped classroom or how this is going to work, please make sure to let me know when you guys come back tomorrow.